There is something wrong in my house.
Hi, I'm new to this whole reaching out thing here, but I think I'm starting to get a little bit annoyed. I'm 20 years old. Around December of last year, my father decided to get a one-way ticket to his home country, and I, being a college student with a job, stayed home. At home, I live alone with my father because my parents divorced when I was younger. I lived at my mother's house until I got older and decided to move in with my father. Before this, there was a whole thing with sleep paralysis. The day my father left, I came home with my puppy. He was known to go to random places and start growling. It started getting dark, so I decided to sleep in the living room while watching an anime. The living room is on the ground floor, and the couch faces the wall facing the stairs. So I put the dog's bed near me on the floor and watched the show. There was one point when something funny was happening, and I started laughing. But I heard a girl laughing with me. I have little sisters, so I could compare the laughter to theirs. Except they don't live here. I paused the show and kept hearing laughter. I decided not to move and pressed play, hoping nothing else would happen. That same month, I started experiencing weirder things. I would hear noises. They varied from things falling, sounds of people walking, or people saying something almost in a whisper. One time when I was home alone, I heard something banging and banging upstairs. I got irritated because I was doing my homework and yelled for them to be quiet, and it stopped. I started to wonder how often it would actually work, so I tried it again. One day my friend came over, and as I was telling her about the situation, it sounded like someone was repeatedly throwing things on the floor. My friend looked at me with wide eyes, scared, but I was used to weird things happening. I looked up at the stairs in the dark and said, "Stop, you're scaring visitors to my house." And she stopped. My friend decided to leave shortly after out of fear. I couldn't blame her. In February, I was cleaning my bedroom and listening to YouTube when I heard footsteps outside nonstop. I immediately paused the video and listened. The footsteps continued. I ran to my window, and that's when the footsteps stopped. I went to bed and decided to think about what had happened, which soon turned into watching YouTube videos. I started watching a YouTube channel that talked to spirits, and we could even communicate in strange ways. I said out loud, "Why can't you just use your words like them? It would be easier to talk." Then my TV seemed to pause and restart. I got irritated getting up, unplugging and plugging the TV back in. I sat back down and put the video back on, forgetting about what had happened. Once again, I saw how easy it was for them to communicate with spirits. So I said, "You guys are terrible. You can't do much, it seems, other than make random noise." That's when the same thing happened with my TV. At that point, I started putting two and two together. I turned off the TV and decided to experiment. I didn't know if it would work because, although I believe in spiritual things, I think everything can have an answer. I started with the rules. 1 knock barked yes, 2 sack no, and 5 seconds of silence. I don't know. I started asking if they knew of a friend's cousin who had died. 1 knock. Do you think they're in a better place? 5 seconds. Is he okay now? 1 knock. Is he a good spirit? 2 knocks. This irritated me, but I thought it was interesting to communicate, even if it was a schizophrenic moment. "Do you want to hurt me?" 2 knocks. "Was that you walking outside?" 1 tap. "Are you looking out for me?" 5 seconds. I freaked out and decided to stop that. I said, "Okay, that's it. No more." I continued watching my videos and fell asleep while doing so. Everything started to normalize when my father came back. There were no more noises in the house. Now, it was only when I was alone in my car coming home from work, or even at work. I worked the night shift. Back to today. My father left once again, and he's back. It's been 4 days since my father left, and everything is back. The noises and voices are all here. I don't want to see them. Last night, they knocked over a box of bleach that was on the counter, and there were footsteps upstairs while I was in the living room downstairs. This morning, they moved the chair from the table to the middle of the kitchen. I didn't do that. I'm missing a lot of information, but I want answers. I don't care which side you're on. I've been to see my mother's friend, whose mother is a real psychic. He says my third eye is open, and they are trying to get me to help them. I saw my friend's deceased cousin in my dream, trying to get help. My mom's friend says that I attract spirits to come with me. I don't know what to think since I am a person who reasons most of the time and only feeds into an illusion of the spirit world sometimes.
The Genie and the Bride. My great-grandmother, on my mother's side, passed away 2 years ago. She was between 95 and 100 years old. I don't know the exact age because I never asked her. 2 months before her death, she told us about an incident from many years ago when she was a preteen. She had a maternal aunt who was well known for her beauty. They came from a family of rich people, also known as nobles. From the time she was 12, her grandfather started having nightmares about a man who told him to never let his granddaughter get married because she would be his wife. The grandfather asked an old man for help to find out what this dream meant. The old man told him that the man he had seen in his dream was a genie who had fallen in love with his granddaughter. Although he didn't believe in genies, he was afraid for his granddaughter, and that's why he rejected most people who proposed to her. But there was one person he couldn't reject. It was his best friend's grandson. That boy was her childhood friend, and he was a frequent visitor to her house. So when he proposed to her in front of the whole family, the grandfather had no choice but to accept. She, the aunt, was then 15 years old. Everything went smoothly until the night before the wedding. The bride was sitting in a room with her bridesmaids, including my great-grandmother, when the incident happened. Suddenly, the bride's heir, who was tied in a traditional way, we call it kopoa, but I don't know exactly how to say it, started to feel cramps in his hands, and his head started to hurt. No one knew what was happening except the grandfather. His worst nightmare came true. The groom stayed like that the whole night, and some other paranormal incidents also happened at night, like knocks on the walls and footsteps. That night the grandfather saw the same man in his dream. This time he was furious and warned him not to make that mistake again, or the consequences would be bad. Well, the next day, the groom was back to normal, but the marriage was called off. The boy was not allowed to enter the house, well, until the grandfather passed away 3 years later. After that, the boy started visiting them again, and little by little, everyone forgot the grandfather's warning. Well, 5 years after the incident, the marriage happened again. This time, nothing paranormal happened. The groom was dressed in the traditional white sherwani. His face was shining with happiness. Unfortunately, that happiness didn't last long. That night, the bride was in her room talking to her friends and sisters. Suddenly, the windows and doors of the house started shaking violently. Loud screams could be heard from outside. A terrible stench started coming out of the bride's room. Everyone went out except the bride, who was crying inside. The groom realized that something was wrong with his bride and asked the father for permission before entering the room. Suddenly, the door closed behind him and they were both locked inside. It took them 3 to 4 hours to break the door from outside. What they saw shocked them. The room was stained with red liquids. The bride had disappeared and the groom was lying on the floor. His head was twisted, his eyes were bulging, and his skin was pale. The beautiful white sherwani was stained. On the chair was a small bag. Inside was a gold coin. It was the bride price. The father spent day and night trying to find the girl, but they couldn't. In the end, they had no choice but to accept that she had disappeared. They made an iron chest for her and locked it before burying it underground. They considered it to be their daughter's grave. 3 years later, the father had a dream in which the man told him that his daughter was alive and happy. They also had 2 children together, and the bag was a treasure that would give him 1 gold coin every time he put his hand in it. The father never checked if what he said was true or not, since nothing can make up for the loss of her daughter. Well, today that house is nothing but an abandoned haunted house full of ghost stories. We call it Babu Derbari, which means master's house. Well, it seems that was the first haunted incident in that house. In fact, it is very close to my cousin's house where we go on vacation. Maybe that chest is still somewhere, but we will never know.
The ghost train. I'll try to keep this encounter brief. Sorry if it's a bit long. Around 1991, my twin brother and I were 15 years old. It was a sunny day in Apex, North Carolina in the middle of summer. Our mother had gone to work, so we were home alone playing video games. I decided to go play with the kids across the street. All the neighborhood kids live across the street and across the old railroad tracks. We had never seen the tracks in operation in our entire lives. People used to go over the tracks to get to the trails in the area. I loved ATVs, so I was always looking for them, especially when crossing the tracks. This time, as I crossed the tracks, I looked to the left and saw a train car. I thought the city of Apex was coming to put on a train display for the neighborhood kids. As I kept looking, I noticed it moving slowly toward me. I expected someone to push it, but no one was there. I turned around and went back into the house, walked through the door and told my brother that I had seen a train coming down the tracks. We both looked out the window until we saw it pass through the trees and ran to meet it. There were two men inside, not in a train car, not in the locomotive, but in a caboose coming down the tracks alone at slow speed. One man was at the front window of the yellow caboose and the other at the rear, holding onto the ladder and looking out the side of the caboose. The guy in front of the van had his hand and arm on the window latch. The two guys in the van were wearing blue and white striped driver's uniforms, tall, with a nice hat and white t-shirt. They both looked at us and gave us the friendliest smile we had ever seen. They interacted with us the whole time, moving from our right to our left, waving when we waved back, and we were in complete awe. I started to pick up a rock and throw it so it would hit the wheel of the van. I thought they would be angry about that. Then they turned around to look at the tracks and kept going. The guy in the back of the caboose interacted with us longer than the guy in the front. The guy in the back turned around and kept waving at us. My brother and I ran through the neighborhood as fast as we could. We gathered all the kids we could see, yards from the corner store, so we could all see that the caboose was coming back up. It never did, so we all walked along the tracks for a mile. There was no turnout on the tracks, and the tracks ended in dirt mounds, and the street was on the other side of the tracks, and there was no caboose to be found. It just disappeared into thin air. We had never seen the uniforms they were wearing then, until I asked my aunt what they were wearing years later, and she described what we saw before I told her who the guys in that caboose were. Everything we saw was completely solid, and the caboose was making noise as it came down the track. The typical metallic screeching noise. I know what we saw that day. I don't think it was our imagination.